politicians I mentioned, Kenna and Coughlin. The real guy calling the shots down here was one of our original organized crime bosses on the south side, Diamond Jim Colosimo. Diamond Jim Colosimo. Now, of course, he wasn't born Diamond Jim. He had to work into that. He ended up as a city worker, a street sweeper, basically. Did some odd jobs on the side for the mom to make extra money. Decided he wanted to work his way up the underworld ladder. Well, he met a woman who helped him out a lot with that call. A woman named Victoria Moresco. Loaded with money. She's a madam. So she had a whole empire down here, you know, of illegal ballerina studios, we say. Now, she's a bit older than Jim. He charmed her, they got married. He added gambling to the mix. They had their own empire going down here. That's when he became Diamond Jim. This guy, when he'd get duped up, he was a big show-off. He'd have diamonds everywhere. He'd have a diamond ring on every finger of both of his hands. He'd put diamonds wherever he could think of, in his cufflinks, in his tie tags. Sometimes he'd carry a pocket full of diamonds around in a pouch. He was showing off to people. Hey, look at this one. In his place. He opens up this place, Colosimo's Cafe. Go by where I was at. This is the top of the line 1920 supper club back there. They're called the Cat's Pajamas, the BCs. Everybody was dressed up in here, tuxedos, flowing gowns. You know, you or I would have trouble getting in somewhere like this, or affording it. Could be an average guy, a week's salary to get a meal in this place. Famous people were known to hang out here when they were in town. People were seen at Colosimo's Cafe like Charlie Chaplin, Al Jolson, W.C. Fields, Mae West, Kanye West. You know, people like that hung out here. But Jim got a bit older. Medicine Field Follies girl, a dancer and showgirl half his age. Now, Jim has all these showbiz connections. This is one of the top entertainment spots in the city he had going. So she's trying to take advantage of that. They spend time together. He falls head over heels. He takes it with this young dame and he dumps his wife. Well, yeah, this is bad news. There's a lot of problems with it. The woman that made him into Diamond Jim. But even worse, now he has a Sicilian ex-wife. It's the last thing you want. Now, her brothers were rumored to have been involved with this group he was getting trouble from. La Mana Nera. The Black Hand. They were extortionists. That's Italian for the Black Hand. Now, at first, Jim just paid him to shut him up. He's asking for it. I mean, he's showing off all his money, so these guys come after him. At first, he's loaded with money. He just pays them. They keep raising the price, so eventually he stops paying them. Then he starts getting these letters delivered. At the bottom of each letter is an ink-stamped black handprint. Now, that means he's marked for death. So he brought his nephew out here from Brooklyn, Johnny Torrio, to help him deal with this. Johnny Torrio. But Torrio sees Jim getting into more and more trouble. Now he was just a young man. A young man back in New York who needed to be out of town himself by the name of Alphonse Capone. That's how Torrio Capone got out here working for Diamond Jim out of Colosimo's, which now is over to our right. This is what's left of it. Now back then, early on, the South Side was the big entertainment and tourism capital of the city. It's long since switched to the North Side. I mean, Al Capone was one of the first guys that perceived that was going to happen. But this was just neglected so much. By 1970 or so, it basically collapsed. Now, these are some of the brick walls that remain, all that's left of it. Now they run a speakeasy dinner theater out here today, a place called Tommy Gunn's Garage. You call up 773-RAT-A-TAT, you make your reservation. They give you a special key, password. And you go through the door with that, you knock on that, and you give your password. There's an actual address on there. It looks like nothing. And there's a whole show in the back, like a real speakeasy, On the outside, it looks like nothing, but when you go in, it opens up wide in the back with a whole show going on back there. Well, they have this here because this was where Capone and Torrio got started when they came into Chicago. But the thing is, maybe Diamond Jim just liked trouble. Because he's already got this trouble already from his ex and his, this La Mana Nera. And now he started asking for more trouble. 1919, Torrio Capone came up to Jim and they said, Jim, this prohibition is the biggest gift we could ask for. We could make so much money. We could start on this now. We could start bootlegging. We could start opening the breweries. We could get going. We could make so much money. Jim just says, shut up. I'm paying you to watch my back. I don't want any input from him. What does he need to make more money for? He's Diamond Jim. He's got diamonds everywhere. And another thing, this is a whole tricky thing now, because he's paid off all the local politicians. Jim can sit here, do anything he wants, no one's ever going to bother the guy. But getting into bootlegging, that's prohibition, that's a federal law. That's a whole new level of people he's got to figure out to bribe. He's fine where he's at, he's loaded with money, he's got this young bride to focus on, he wants nothing to do with this bootlegging. But now Jim was keeping money from being made, so people weren't happy with the guy. So one night, well actually the wee hours of the morning, Jim's in his own place here. He's relaxing after the place is closed. He's going over the day's receipts. He's listening to music. Enrico Caruso, actually, on his wind-up turntable. He's a great, famous opera singer who was his boyhood friend back in Sicily. And Caruso would come and do an extra number here when he was in town at the opera because they were such good boyhood friends. He's listening to that on the turntable, relaxing a bit. Someone sneaks up behind Diamond Jim, shoots him in the back of the head. Like most of these killings to this day, no one can tell you 100% who actually pulled the trigger. Now, a lot of TV shows and movies, have you ever seen Boardwalk Empire or any of those? They always show a guy named Frankie Yale to have been the trigger man on it. Which would have made sense. That was Capone's former boss back in New York. It would make sense to bring someone from out of town. Jim was so well connected in Chicago, it'd be real hard to find anybody willing to do it here. But it could have been all sorts of people. Capone himself was his personal bodyguard. He called in sick that day. In any event, Jim's dead. Torrio takes over the south side here. They kept working on a clothes horse here. Now, eventually Torrio got shotgunned real bad by the North Siders, like I told you. Says, Al, Chicago's yours. That's when Capone takes over Chicago. Kept working on Closmos here. This whole neighborhood became Capone Central. Any TV shows and movies you see Al Capone in Chicago, 80% of what you see happened within 6 to 8 blocks of right here. Now, he ran things out of the Lexington Hotel. Back then, it was the top luxury hotel in Chicago at the time. They called it Capone's Castle. He had 3 floors. He lived in the center floor. He had a floor full of bodyguards above and below. Now, over there on your left, you see that there's a black Marriott behind him. Right to the right, that big, tall glass and steel building. That is the Lex Chicago today. It's a condominium building. But they named it the Lex because it stands on the site where the Lexington Hotel used to stand. Now, they were going to tear that down, when they were going to tear that down, before that, this guy named Geraldo Rivera came into town. This was what started out Fox News. He was going to bring the world Al Capone's hidden treasure. This was a big TV special, the most watched TV in history at the time. A 3-hour special. All he rounded up was an empty gin bottle. And someone should have told Geraldo that Capone was a gangster and not a pirate. Hidden treasure, right? But that's where that was at. Right at this leg. But like I said, this was all Capone Central back then. And, if you look around, this was a mini Las Vegas. No, it's not like that at all anymore. Nowhere near, that kind of neighborhood. Things change over the years. Neighborhoods change. People's reputations change. Back then, Al Capone was actually getting headlines for being a man of the community, for opening a soup kitchen. Time magazine named him Man of the Year. By the way, the little castle-shaped building across the street, you guys probably have White Castles by it. That was the original White Castle that opened in Chicago in 1931. Today it's a chicken joint. Now they moved it across the street here to this newer White Castle here. So, maybe Capone went over there to get his sliders with his pedals, Harold and Kumar or something. But yeah, that was, like I said, it's modeled on the Water Tower place, actually. Water Tower place on Michigan Avenue. The old Water Tower. But yeah, so Capone was getting this different reputation back then. Getting headlines for being a man of the community and stuff. Now understand, these guys we're talking about, these gangsters, are human. Even if they're gangsters, they got their good and their bad sides. And Capone was loaded with money, believe it or not. $120 million plus self-worth. He was the richest private citizen in history. In 1920s money, that was like Bill Gates, Oprah Winfrey kind of money, right? He had a lot of money. He didn't give a whole lot of money to the poor. Real soup kitchen and everything. All these guys did. All these gangsters we talked about, they're human, like I said, but they're also Italian, Irish, Polish. All these gang bosses we talk about, raised Catholic. Now they're all mixed up. Their career doesn't work so well with that, but they all want to give a little something back. Deano Banyan gave a lot of money to the poor up on the north side, too. Jaime Weiss made sure to carry rosary beads with himself when he went to shoot somebody. Which made it all okay. But with Capone, it was public relations. Before you ever heard that term. Al loved the spotlight. He'd go out of his way to talk to reporters whenever they wanted him to. He even called his own press conferences. Which that came back to bite him eventually. But the press loved it. He wasn't hiding from them. He's talking to them. They knew they were selling newspapers to a public who was widely ignoring prohibition anyway. They made Capone into a good guy outlaw figure. Now, our federal government was never fooled. They're sitting there wondering, why didn't Chicago get this guy arrested? Well, if they were going to wait for that, we'd still be waiting. It's one thing about Chicago, one reason it became a headquarters of all this stuff, everybody here was willing to take a day off. They're almost all on Capone's payroll. Cops, lawyers, judges, city council, some of our mayors. Finally, the feds figured out and they think, we got to get involved. And that's how they got this Elliot Ness guy in. Now, Elliot Ness was simply an accountant who happened to get a job with the U.S. Treasury Department. Probably because of the no sales of alcohol clause or whatever, I don't know, the Treasury Department was given the job of enforcing the Prohibition law. Ness became he had this reputation as Mr. Honest. And that was really the resume you needed to go after Capone with all this bribe money flying around. So they made Ness the man. He put together a team of agents. He came into town to get Capone. Ness gets here. Al's guys welcome him to town. They bring him a special welcome to Chicago envelope with $2,000 in it. Understand, Ness is making about $2,500 an entire year. They say, Mr. Ness, you look here aware what Al's doing. We're bringing an envelope every week. Ness turned around and called the news conference. He said, Capone's boys bringing envelopes with cash. They can bring them all they want, but every one of these will remain untouched. Eventually, the newspapers roll with it, and you get Elliot Ness and the Untouchables. And now Ness does anything you may see in old TV shows and movies, busting up speakeasies, pouring booze into the streets, stopping all the liquor trucks. But he and the feds were really racking their brain to come up with some way to pin something legally on Capone. See, Capone was running the organization these Sicilian ways of doing this he learned from Johnny Torrio. Things like have so many levels of management from the top to the bottom, it's almost impossible to trace who knew what or who gave the order for what. Really the same way our mayors have run things ever since. Anything high profile happens, you make sure at the same time it's going on, Al is seen on the other side of town in a bright suit out in public, so you can't tie him anywhere near the scene of it. Ness and the feds were really getting frustrated, trying to come up with some way to get pin something legally on Capone. Oh, coming up here on your right, we're going to go by a ceramic wall of dragons. It was actually a gift from China to welcome us to our Chinatown. It's coming up on the right. You also see another red awning to welcome us to Chinatown coming up on the left as well. You can see a good south view of the Sears and the Willis Tower over there to your right as well. But yeah, our Chinatown neighborhood here, there's a stop right off the Red Line subway there for Chinatown. All sorts of different regional, any type of Chinese food you may want to find. You can find merchandise in this neighborhood that's actually made in China, too. You want something else to do in this city. Now, see, the thing is, so Ness and the feds were really frustrated until they hit upon an idea. They started thinking, with all the money Capone's making, I checked, he hasn't been filing tax returns. Now, do you think we can maybe get him on this? If we find some receipts to prove that he makes money and spends money. Now, understand at the time they didn't know for sure this would work. Income taxes was new. That just started up around World War I. Come on. Yeah, this was new territory. They basically tested the whole idea of tax evasion charges out on Capone. You got your first courtroom-based media circus. They figured out he paid off an entire jury, so they changed juries on him at the last second. But that's how they got him. Sent him off on the road to eventually end up in the federal government's brand new island retreat for the criminally elite, a place known as Alcatraz. Yeah, not because all we know Capone's been doing today, but the only thing they could legally pin on him at the time, which was the taxing. Now, to this day, they still do this, guys like this. When you know what they're doing, but for whatever reason you can't legally prove it, you can always turn around and nail them on something like tax evasion. Sometimes with politicians, things it's something like mail fraud, but yeah, like I said, they still call this to this day the Al Capone way of getting these guys. Now, before Capone goes on to the rock, there's a lot more to our story. Just around the corner here, we're going to go up show you, I think, it was a famous old brewery complex back then, which played a part in the whole story, so that's right around the corner here, coming up next. Chernoff and Brewing Company. This was the largest brewery in Chicago heading into 1920, the 6th largest in the country. They were known for making Edelweiss beer. Now, this was a huge operation. There's a whole series of red brick buildings down here. They made their own barrels, their own bottles, distribution. There was about a dozen or so red brick buildings. Now, we're going to sit across from the main one over there with that big centerpiece sticking out of it. That was a pump, actually. A big pump that went underground to an underground spring. As far underground as the Willis or the Sears Tower is above ground. Huge operation. Now, there's very few buildings left. There's only a couple of them right here. Across the street, there's a self-storage building, that similar red brick building. They made their own barrels over there. There's next to this big red brick building, when you sit by it, just past it, there's another red brick building, which was also an office building, but these are the only ones left. Now, this is in any book, I'm told, on the Prairie style of architecture, the building we're going to pull up in front of. Now, I'm no expert in this stuff, but it's classic Prairie style architecture. Architects figure, the architecture should match the people and the land. So like the big Great Plains and the Prairie, long and basically flat. Now, in the Midwest, a lot of farmers and things were very practical, or maybe cheap. Don't spend money to decorate buildings. They do real simple things, like you see, they pull forward layers of bricks. I think they call it corbelling. It doesn't add additional bricks or add any costs, but it gives it a little texture and some shadow. They do things like they recess those windows up there, so it kind of looks like there's columns there. Like I said, real classic example of Prairie-style architecture. It still says the name of what this used to be, the Peach Chernoff and Brewing Company, up there in the archway. Although today, this is an office building, mostly rented out by the Chinese Merchant Society. Well, this huge brewery is going to shut their doors when Prohibition's going to kick in, going to leave 1,700 people out of work. Al Capone picked up the lease on it. It's a dummy corporation, all this hard-to-trace paperwork. His name is nowhere on any of it. And some of his boys are thinking, what is he, screwy? Is he thinking he's going to sit here in Prohibition and make beer in his famous brewery? Well, actually, they do, except they get a license to make this stuff called near beer. You make beer the regular way and you boil off the alcohol, so it's only 0.5%. You got to drink 48 of them or something in an hour and get the buzz of one beer. And more power to you if you can pull that off, right? I mean, they still make it to this day. They call it non-alcoholic beer now, right? Well, this was a legal exception in Prohibition. This allowed the big breweries, Anheuser-Busch and whatever, to legally make some profit. They could legally make this near beer stuff. Now, the feds would have to inspect it, but then they give it a seal of approval. You could ship it in broad daylight. Now, once it was sitting out at the speakeasies late at night, though, boys went around with these huge veterinarian syringes. Big needles you use on, like, horse or cattle. They fill those things up with 180 proof rot gut whiskey. Stick it somewhere like the center cork of the barrel or the side of the barrel so you didn't break the seal. You put alcohol back into the beer. Not the tastiest stuff, but this was Prohibition. Because of the big needle, they would call this spiking the beer. That's why to this day you still hear this for adding alcohol to something. If you go to a party, hey, somebody spiked the punch. This came from spiking the beer in Prohibition. Now, as Prohibition wore on, they would use what they could get, making it harder to get real alcohol some of the time. Sometimes they'd use industrial alcohol or wood alcohol. People died or went blind from some of the stuff they were drinking. And there's another term that came out of Prohibition was blind drunk. Today it means you're really drunk. Back then it might have been you were temporarily or permanently blinded. Or sometimes they use ether. Ether was a chemical dentist used to knock you out with. Put ether in the beer and turn a pale green. You drank it, you turn a pale green. You drink that stuff, you get a great buzz for like 20 minutes and you pass out for half a day. You'd wake up, half your body's numb for about a week. Now, this building and the next one you've seen before, whether you know it or not, if you've seen a movie called The Blues Brothers. Now, at the beginning of the movie, the Blues Brothers, they come back to the orphanage where they grew up in, and this was it. They made this building and the next one out to be the orphanage. Now, they put a little church up in the background and everything. They actually pull the Bluesmobile here between these two buildings where there's a fence today. They go through the door of the next one to go see the nun, the penguin. As she slaps them around, sends them off on their mission from God. You really got Chicago in a complex here. You got a brewery with an Al Capone and a Blues Brothers connection. Sort of a holy trinity. All the way we'll take our older neighborhoods of the city. Now, one thing to keep an eye out for, we'll see a lot of buildings, sometimes just an alleyway or a yard that's down below street level, like it's sitting down in a ditch. Just some good examples coming up. On the left, you can see there's a whole sloping yard. And there's a whole other alley right next to this building here. On this next corner on the right, see the second part of the building here right there, the way below street level. I think there's a real low alleyway coming up here on the left. In some cases, they filled down some of it, but not the alley. They did for the rest of the building. Now, you'll see buildings like this occasionally around the city, below street level, like this, anywhere else around the city. But you see them all over Pilsen. You're about to find out why. And there's an art gallery here, too. Pilsens are one of our second largest art gallery district, actually, today. The second Friday every month, there's like a 6 to 8 block stretch. They have open galleries and studios. You walk around, they have hors d'oeuvres and drinks and things. People making a fan out of it. Also known for outdoor murals, mostly on the back streets. There's a lot of outdoor murals through Pilsen, going back to the 1970s or so, some of them. But yeah, here's listening to see all these lower yards and things. I told you with the Great Chicago Fire, after that we spread rubble across the city, so everything went up 6 feet in height. We wanted to solidify the swampy footing. Well, the way the winds were blowing, a lot of Pilsen didn't burn. So they spread rubble over the streets, but they weren't going to spread it over buildings that were still standing. So you can still see buildings around Pilsen sitting at or close to the original level of the city. So in the back streets here in Pilsen, you can occasionally find a really old building, grandfathered into all the newer fire codes, still sitting there built out of stuff like wood and tar paper. Now imagine everything built out of that back then. Buildings, walkways, see how close together everything's built? Now they did trace the Great Chicago Fire back to Mrs. O'Leary's barn. Of course, they don't know whether a cow played any part in it. Actually, on the site of where her barn was at, they have a fire training academy today. It caused the fire, so now they try to prevent fires. And if you ever watch the TV show Chicago Fire, whenever they show the firemen training and stuff, that they show that's actually the main training center in the city that you see. That's where Mrs. O'Leary's barn used to stand there. Well, yeah, the fire did start there. Everything's sitting here built out of wood. Right across the street, there was a lumber yard and a turpentine factory. What could possibly go wrong? Actually, it was a complete recipe for disaster. What happened was there was this fireman Olympics around that time, where different cities nearby all had these little competitions among their firemen. So all their equipment was all banged up. A lot of the guys were worn out and exhausted. Like I said, the fire broke out. And part of the reason this really destroyed pretty much the entire city was all these factors came together. Now, and occasionally you can see a lower yard here in Pilsen too, and get more of a feel for the original swampy terrain that was around here. And that's actually what named the city. Now, the original people around here were Potawatomi Indians. Notable crops that would grow in this swampy terrain was wild onion and garlic. The Potawatomi named the whole area Chick-a-goo, which translated as, smelly onion and garlic all over the place. So the first Europeans coming out here were French. They heard Chicago, they said Chicago. Other Europeans followed, eventually became the Windy City thing, Chicago. Watch out around there for top bears. Now, you'll see signs too for Maxwell Street Polish sausage. Maxwell Street is up here a ways. Now, Maxwell Street is a street. They still do nostalgic things here and there on Sundays, these markets. But it used to be for over 100 years, Maxwell Street was one big open-air market. Yeah, you get an idea for some of the original swampy terrain, some of these lower yard, grassy areas around here. Yeah, Maxwell Street was an open-air market for over 100 years. A lot of the Jewish pushcart merchants, people come and haggle over all the prices. They showed that in the Blues Brothers. That was the open-air market scene. That was toward the end of it. It was toward the 80s or so. They eventually kind of put the clamp down on that. But not a lot of neighborhoods hidden around here. We came out of Pilsen. In a moment, you'll see the letters UIC all around the University of Illinois Chicago neighborhood around here. They have a Greek town north of here. We're going to go around the corner to Little Italy in a moment. But this neighborhood is famous for something else altogether. Now, it started up around 1900. That turn of the century, a great migration started up. African Americans started moving in big numbers from out of the South into cities in the North. A lot of guys who came to Chicago have been playing blues music for years. Get toward the 1940s, they're electrifying that sound, plugging in amplifiers. These street corners back then, you could have people like Muddy Waters playing on one corner, especially Halsted Street right here was a big location for that. Across the street could have been Howlin' Wolf. You had Willie Dixon playing up here, but all these big blues guys playing. Eventually people said we should record this stuff. The company Chess Records forms and starts recording these guys. No, actually, one past it. What's the next one? Yeah, the next one. Yeah, Chess Records records these guys, and Chess Records has its own mini museum. It's on South Michigan Avenue and 21st Street, right around the corner from where we show you Capone got started there. But they recorded this music and people ended up hearing it everywhere. Early on, people growing up in the United States like Buddy Holly and Elvis Presley, Little Richard. Eventually, people across the ocean start hearing this. John Lennon, Pete Townsend, Keith Richards. Everybody started saying, we want this electric blues sound. So you can really say rock and roll, the whole future of music, eventually the British invasion. Oh, sorry, I made this thing. Yeah, all these people hear this, so everything, the future, rock and roll, the British invasion, everything really all came out of the neighborhood, the street corners we're going by here. So next up, we're going to head around the corner to show you what our West Side Gang was up to in the neighborhood of Little Italy. So that's right around the way here.
I gotta pick something back.
Now right now we're coming up onto Taylor Street, which goes through the heart of this Little Italy neighborhood. Now Chicago's known as a city of neighborhoods, a lot of ethnic neighborhoods. You may hear others called the Little Italy. Usually when you hear the term, this is the neighborhood they talk about. They have the Festa Italiana here in the summertime and everything. Now right off the bat on the right, we go by the Tuscany restaurant. Today, some of the best Italian food you can find. Almost everybody working there is actually out here from Italy. But that was a warehouse back in the 20s where a guy had a business running out of. Sundays, you'd see a line of police officers going around that building, waiting in line to get their payouts to look the other way. Now, it's a very old-fashioned neighborhood to this day. A lot of these businesses close on Sundays, a lot of specialty stores and things. Now, in the corner here of this next block, we'll see this butcher shop. You can see whole lambs hanging in the back of that. Then a couple doors down from that, we're going to go by Mario's Italian Lemonade Stand. Now, Mario just opened up for the season May 1st. He started that lemonade stand as a little boy. His mother encouraged him. Today, it's a big part of the neighborhood. He owns a lot of the property around here. Weekends and stuff, when it's hot out, you see lines up and down the sidewalk for Mario's. All these different flavors of Italian lemonade, got 50 flavors or some chunks of fruit and all this big stuff in them. That's a Mario's Italian Lemonade on the right. Now, coming up on the left, across from that, is the Al's #1 Italian beef. Yeah, if you don't know about the Italian beef sandwich, it's a little different like a Philly steak, but it's a Chicago sandwich, kind of like the Chicago hot dog. Hard to find outside this region. They basically figured it out in the Depression when you soaked a piece of beef in water, it went farther, fed more people. But it kind of to make its own au jus kind of thing, and they added spices to it. So they take that, they slice it real thin, they stuff it in a big Italian loaf, piece of bread. Stuff on top of it, sauteed, green peppers and/or hot peppers, whatever you want on top of it. But you can only find those usually in the Chicago area. Any hot dog or hamburger stand around here has an Italian beef today. Al's itself is a mini chain. There's one location not far from where we started by the McDonald's there, but any hot dog or hamburger stand has them. Now that's the original Al's, though, where they invented the sandwich in the 1930s. Now back then, this neighborhood was more often called Little Sicily, because in the 20s, Sicilians came pouring out here in huge numbers. The government over there was terrible. Mount Etna had erupted. Guys are coming out looking for work. Many of them not knowing much of the language. Well, one guy willing to help him out had his business running in the warehouse where that Tuscany restaurant is today. This guy, Bloody Angelo Jenna and the Jenna clan. Now, they would sponsor your trip out here from Sicily. Once they were your sponsors, it was real rough getting out of this wreck. One of the reasons they called him Bloody Angelo. But most of the guys were fine with that. They couldn't find other work, and this was an easy work-at-home program. They gave you a kit with all the ingredients, and they told you just what to do. Start with this big 5-gallon urn. You have little tubes going off it to filter everything out of there. But you'd fill that urn about halfway with water, pour on 5 pounds of sugar, top the whole thing off with dried hard kernel corn, boil the whole thing down real slow. End of the day, you get yourself a gallon or more of whiskey. 180 proof rot cut whiskey. Really ethanol. This stuff has, you could run your car on it. It tasted like exhaust, it smelled like exhaust, and there was a whole cloud float over this neighborhood back then that smelled like that. Now, this is Prohibition. I mentioned some stuff. People were used to drinking some pretty, not the greatest stuff. But this stuff was so nasty, people had to get creative to get this stuff down. So that's why the 1920s brought the world a brand new thing called the cocktail. People had to get it down, so they started doing things like pouring it in different fruit juices, and it wasn't so bad. Or you thought of other things. You could stick something in a bottle, break it open, throw in something like a coriander seed, leave the whole thing out in the sun all day. End of a sunny day, you'd open it up and taste and smell like oranges. Put all kinds of things. Put anise in there, chop that up with sugar, leave the whole thing in the sun. You basically get sambuca. You know, height of this whole operation, Andrew and his brothers had over 2,000 people working for him. Just sitting home all day long, cooking down gallons of this rot cut. But only one customer buying it. With a special agreement to be the only buyer, Al Capone. He had a cozy relationship with the Jennas, what we called our West Side Gang. But after a while, Prohibition unwound, and they were seeing how much money they were making. Angelo started rethinking this. He was talking with his brothers, saying, we must be too powerful.